This one was initiated at 9:34 and 10 seconds, and according to the official story, that didn't happen until almost 9:38. And yet you're supposed to believe that that smoke cloud was caused by what happened, some minutes later in the middle. Now compare the explosion that you just saw, that they claim is from the impact of Flight 77, which it cannot be, with this explosion. This is a photograph from one of the military contractor did a test of ramming an F-15 fighter jet, which of course is a smaller plane, but nevertheless it's going at a very high speed, into a hardened wall similarly hardened to the one at the Pentagon West Wedge 1, on West Side Wedge 1. And notice that the concrete is just dustified. However, as that says, the concrete at the Pentagon didn't explode into a dust cloud. It turned to mush. It was melted. There was an autopsy that the Pentagon contracted of the concrete around the support columns. Now, the support columns in the Pentagon were steel reinforced. So there were steel spirals in the middle of them with the concrete on the outside. And inside the Pentagon and on the outer wall, many of those support columns, the concrete was completely melted off, and it was just the spiral steel left. And so the Pentagon contracted an autopsy of the concrete of these support columns in the so-called alleged plane penetration path of alleged Flight 77. And from a quote from the report itself, quote, showed the effects of intense, concentrated, and prolonged heat that had turned the concrete on these columns to mush, that is, to melted it. However, as you're about to see, you cannot melt concrete at temperatures any lower than about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit to 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which are the temperatures also, interestingly, of thermite. Now, this is just a photograph I took from the web of the molten concrete from the Twin Towers. And when Richard Gage gives his presentations about the melted concrete at the World Trade Center towers, proving that the collapses and internal heat could not have come, this intense heat could not have come from either a plane impact or fires therefrom or office fires therefrom, which is the official lie at the World Trade Center. This is also true at the Pentagon. And he gives this, these degrees as the melting range for concrete, depending upon the makeup of the concrete, from 3,272 to 4,532 degrees Fahrenheit, and Richard Gage normally puts it at 4,500 degrees. Versus, of course, jet fuel fires, essentially kerosene, at the very most are 1,796 degrees Fahrenheit, and open air jet fuel A fires are usually only in the 500 to 600 degree range. Immediately adjacent to the alleged impact point of Flight 77 at column 14 in Wedge 1, I'm now going to give you another proof that, that it was from an internal explosion and not from an outside impact of a plane. This is an overlay of a 757, the outline of 757, over the alleged impact point according to the official story at column 14. You can see the column numbers. Column 14 would have been there, 15, 16, 17, 18. This is the fuselage of the plane. They claim the nose of the plane hit here, and you notice that this oval over here represents the right engine. That is a 6-ton steel and titanium engine that cannot melt until it gets over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and they always survive airplane crashes. If you notice, these columns, even though they are bent, they are still in place, and they are bowed out. They are not bowed in. If a 6-ton steel and titanium engine that is something like 9 feet in diameter had crashed there, there wouldn't be a column there, let alone bowed out. It would certainly, at the very minimum, been bowed in. The same thing is true. This is a photograph to the left of the official story alleged impact point, which is at this red dot. And you can see what's left of the steel reinforcements inside of the outer columns here. They are still in place, the wall hasn't fallen down, and they are also bowed out. You don't get something bowed out from a massive impact of a plane from the outside. You get that from a massive pressure wave from explosions from the inside. Also, the outer wall E-ring windows first bowed out from an internal pressure wave, then back in. Witness Lieutenant Colonel Victor Correa, who worked in the Pentagon in the the Office of the Army Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, which is in the direct path of what the official lie says was Flight 77 entering the building. He said, quote, "I noticed the windows, the outer windows, first bowing out and then coming back in." Now, these windows were part of the hardening of the outer wall at that point in Wedge 1. So they were designed not to shatter, and they were 2 inches thick and had special material on the inside so that they would bow from a pressure wave and not shatter. Also, this is important, even in Wedge 2, to the left of the center line, you can see these windows. This, by the way, this is the very center line. There was a big door at the center line of the Pentagon. I should say the Pentagon West, each side of the Pentagon is about 3 football fields, a little over 900 feet. So this door is at the 450-foot mark with 450 feet on either side of it. Just to the left of the center line, where the wall is not yet hardened, it was hardened over here, not over here in Wedge 2, you can see that office furniture is poking out of these windows from a massive pressure wave on the inside. It's over in Wedge 2. That's at least 150 feet from the alleged impact point. That itself, they say, came in at a diagonal way 150 feet to the right or the south. Now, I call my presentation, and my book title, I believe, will also be Behind the Smoke Curtain. And even though this is a combination of smoke and foam and fire from the fire trucks, this is a common photograph that members of the 9/11 Truth Movement have wrongly used to lead people to believe, and also members of those supporting the official story. They've claimed that right there was the official story alleged impact point of a plane. That's absurd, because that's on the 2nd floor. This is the 1st floor. They're covering up with their smoke curtain. Their smoke and spray curtain. This is the 2nd floor, and the Pentagon Building Performance Report, contracted by the Pentagon itself, states clearly that the engineers who studied the inside damage after they cleaned it out and looked at the columns and what was bent and what wasn't and what was destroyed inside in the alleged plane penetration path and what wasn't, they determined that 90 to 95% of the internal damage in the so-called plane penetration path was on the ground floor. And the ground floor is what's being covered up here. It didn't even reach up here. And if you notice, there's the vertical column is in place anyway, and that's only 10 feet on either side. That's no plane penetration point. Now you're going to see what that smoke and spray screen was covering up. The Pentagon Building Performance Report also officially states, if you can see that little red dot, there are 8 red squares there that represent the external columns. There's column 14, which is the alleged plane Flight 77 impact point. They claim it went through 3 columns, poked its nose or some part of the plane out here. That states, this Pentagon Building Performance Report falsely states that there were 8 missing columns, that they were completely destroyed by the alleged plane impact, whereas there were not, and this proves it. This is probably the most important photograph in all of the truth movement for the Pentagon, and you will find it also in Mizuko's new 9/11 documentary called 9/11 The New Pearl Harbor. It is a composite put together by a brilliant photographer, digital photographer, who took different images after the initial fires were out, before the wall collapsed at 1010 over precisely this area where there are some missing columns. Of course, that's where there was the least support up above it. At 1010, it fell right here, all over this area, kind of down in a diagonal. You'll see that in a moment. But notice, there are only 1, 2, 3, 4 columns missing. That column's still there, that one's still there, those are there, and those are there. They're damaged, but these are the ones that are bowed out. There are only 4 missing columns, not 8. And then this is after the collapse at approximately 1010 over precisely that point. And how convenient. You're going to see evidence in a moment from an expert in the effects of impacts and the effects of explosives, who's written a book, Peter Tiradera, on the Pentagon attack. You're going to see that he says that this collapse itself was caused by controlled demolition. And here he is, retired Air Force officer and expert in the analysis of debris from plane crashes from impacts, Peter Tiradera. I highly recommend his book on the Pentagon attack. The damage pattern, he says, shows controlled demolition brought down the wall at 1010. And now this is very instructive pair of photographs between Oklahoma City after the collapse and the Pentagon after the collapse of the wall, and they cleared out some of the debris. I think it's extremely important that the FBI's code name for the Oklahoma City bombing investigation at the Murrah Federal Building was Oak Bomb. And that's because they knew, and they allowed the public to know, that bombs were the cause of the destruction at the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Now, the official lie tells you that all of that damage was caused by one truck bomb in Timothy McVeigh's Ryder truck. That is a lie. There were at least 4 bombs found inside the building, at least 2 of which went off strategically placed at internal columns. And yet, despite that, the FBI has acknowledged the government has acknowledged the truck bomb on the outside. And so it becomes extremely important to the similarity, and also the fact that the FBI's official code name for the entire 9/11 investigation is Pent Bomb. Now, the PEN stands for Pentagon, the TT stands for Twin Towers, and the BOM is short for bomb or explosives. So the FBI knows the truth, that the real story at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon is inside the building explosives. Also, thermite itself may have been used to bring down that wall section at approximately 1010. That concrete autopsy that the Pentagon contracted that I mentioned before, showing that it had turned to mush, in the report of that concrete autopsy, it states, quote, that there was a reddish and orange tinge due to the presence of iron of the melted concrete. Well, as you know from all of the work of Richard Gage and Stephen Jones and Niels Harrit, that the signature of thermite is sudden intense heat and an iron byproduct. Okay, now, this is the seismic record from the U.S. Geological Survey readout station closest to the Pentagon for the alleged official story time of Flight 77 hitting the building on Wedge 2 and Wedge 1 at almost 9:38, at 9:37 and 46 seconds. And I think that it's extremely important that they have literally, if you can see this bar, they have literally censored the time. That's in their publication. And according to Peter Tiradera, the plane impact results expert, he said this is a smoking gun for controlled demolition. The seismic signal, I'm not going to play this, it'll take a little bit too much time to play this video clip, but it is from Fox News, and if you notice the time here, the time is 10:09, and on the clip, which goes for about 30 seconds, it goes to 10:10. And at 10:10, there is a huge explosion that you hear with the voiceover from the Pentagon reporter saying there was just a huge second explosion at the Pentagon. Boom! Actually, it goes ba-boom! I played that for Richard Gage in September of this year after the DC conference, and when he heard that with the earphones, he went, "Oh my God, it sounds just like the World Trade Center." The Army asked seismologists to check the 5 closest seismic readout stations for any indication of the time of the attack on their own building. They weren't sure. And they went to the same seismologists who did those seismic readout analyses for the World Trade Center towers, where they did find a seismic signal of about 2.1 to 2.3 for impacts of planes 70 to 90 floors above the ground. And guess what? Nothing. No above-noise seismic signal for the alleged official story impact time of a huge 757 going allegedly at 560 miles an hour, slamming into the ground floor. That alone is proof the official story is a lie. Yes? I'll take questions at the end. Thank you. Now, this is a quote from Air Force Lieutenant Colonel David Gapp, who is a magnificent member of the 9/11 Truth community in San Diego, 9/11 Truth. He's a 30-year veteran. His expertise for 3 decades was senior aircraft crash investigator. He was also the military's chief of master air attack planning for both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. This is a true expert. He says, and I have it on tape, videotape, quote, if a 757 going at the speed that the official lie claims, almost 560 miles an hour, had struck anywhere near ground level, there definitely would have been a seismic signal. And I add, as there were for plane impacts high up on the World Trade Center towers, but there was none. Now, even the alleged plane exit hole, the alleged Flight 77 exit hole on the inside of the third ring in, the C ring, according to shape-charged expert Michael Meyer, was itself made with shaped-charge explosives. Mechanical engineer Michael Meyer. This so-called exit hole is the signature of shaped-charge explosives. It is also physically impossible for this C-ring wall, it's about 16 feet in diameter, almost perfectly round hole, still smoking, for the C-ring wall to have failed, and you can tell from the context of the quote, due to only kinetic force of a plane part or debris therefrom going through 3 rings, in a neat, clean circle like that. Now, while showing that very photo, the one that I showed you of the smoking hole, in the alleged exit hole in the C-ring, inside of the C-ring, while showing that very photo at the Pentagon's own press briefing, on September 15th, 2001, that I showed you the photograph earlier from their own website, DoD website, the Pentagon's own spokesman said there weren't any plane parts outside the C-ring exit hole at all. This is the quote, still on the web. There is a hole, yes, there is a hole in the C-ring. They suspect, that is his superiors at the Pentagon, they suspect that this was where a part of the aircraft came through the C-ring. Although he himself was there, and he says, I didn't see any evidence of an aircraft down there. This pile, that pile, this pile outside the hole here is all Pentagon metal. In other words, office furniture stuff. None of that, still the quote, none of that is from an aircraft whatsoever. And continuing the quote, as you can see, they've punched a hole in here. This was punched out by the rescue workers using shaped-charge explosives to clean the debris out and to go in and get any victims from the explosive. If there was nothing from a plane outside the C-ring exit hole, the official story claims that the plane went all the way through, and believe it or not, that all the people in the back of the plane, their bodies weren't found anywhere inside the Pentagon. Most of them, they were found only outside the C-ring exit hole, in the driveway between the C-ring and the B-ring. This graphic is from the Pentagon Building Performance Report. This is the alleged entrance hole. These little orange dots are the bodies or body parts that were found of Pentagon victims, which there are about 100, over 100. And the blue ones are the alleged locations of the plane passengers. And almost all of there's something, I've counted 30 of them allegedly in that pile, where the Pentagon's own audiovisual expert who was there taking the photographs says there was not even part of a plane. So if you can't have part of the plane, you can't have the passengers on the plane. I mean, even a kindergartner can figure that out. And you just heard him from the quote. He said that they had punched out a hole. It's a little bit difficult to see, but here to the right of the hole, after the first photograph you saw with the smoke, and now this is the damage from the smoke, the soot from the smoke. It says punch out here. They punched out that hole with smoke, with shaped-charge explosives put on the wall. And over here is an upside-down A with a cross across it. And guess what? An inverted A is the International Personal Rescue System symbol for dead victim removed. Well, if you put bombs, explosive on the wall, and it goes kaboom on the inside, you might accidentally kill somebody. So, in fact, we know that that happened, and Naval Command Center alleged only survivor, Lieutenant Kevin Schaefer, says that at 9:43 there was a massive explosion not far from that hole, and he walked out of that hole and was burned over about 40 to 50% of his body. In addition, the alleged plane exit hole, there it is with the Pentagon's own aerial photograph from its own website. This is the alleged entrance point of Flight 77 after the wall fell, and they claim it went all the way through all these walls. And poked out here, you're going to see in just a moment that that's one of only 3 exit holes. By exit hole, what the Pentagon itself referred to originally as an exit hole. And the proof of that is this graphic based upon Pentagon sources. It was published in the Washington Post shortly after 9/11, about a few days after. And you notice here, 1, 2, 3, these little orange dots. That little third one is that so-called exit hole. There's that alleged plane poking its little nose allegedly out there. And you got 1, 2, 3 exit holes. That says exit holes, plural, and those are those little orange dots. So from Pentagon sources, the Pentagon at the beginning to the Washington Post in the World was saying there were 3 exit holes. And now you're going to see another Pentagon aerial photograph. There's that alleged plane exit hole, and those are those other 2 exit holes that line up perfectly with those 3 exit holes. The light poles, these famous 5 light poles that were turned over at the Pentagon, that were on the ground. I'm going to show you why they were almost certainly also severed and downed using pre-planted explosives. If the official story were true, Flight 77 or anything, any 757 approaching and hitting the building would have had 11,250 gallons of flammable jet fuel still in its wing tanks. Now this is a graphic from Boeing's own website, see, sourceboeing.com, and I didn't know this before I did this research, but guess what? Most of the fuel in a passenger airliner is in the wings. So from now on, don't sit anywhere here. You want to be sure the safest place to sit from crash investigations is in the back of the plane. So I always sit back here. In any case, the first fuel to be used is in the center fuselage tank, and only after it's used up do they start using the wing tanks. And because the official lie says that Flight 77 was out for 1 hour and 17 minutes, and it was full of jet fuel in all of the tanks, the center and the 2 wing tanks, because it was a cross-country flight. As you'll see in a moment, I have a quote from a pilot who flew this very plane that the government claims was Flight 77 on 9/11, the very physical plane. And he says absolutely that the center wing tank fuel was used up first, and that those 2 wing tanks in a plane that had only been out for a little over an hour would have been full of jet fuel. So they were flying fuel bombs. And so the official story claims that Flight 77, coming in with its wing tanks full of fuel, hit 5, at least 3, depending upon where in the path it would have come in, at least 3, but they actually claimed 5 240-pound light poles like this, going about 560 miles an hour, the leading edge of the wings without penetrating into those fuel tanks and having any problem with the fuel or explosion of the fuel. Now, here's the Top Gun Navy pilot and American Airlines 757 pilot, Commander Ralph Kolstad. He told me this in a taped interview. Quote, if a 757, i.e. Flight 77, they claim, hit a light pole, a single one, going at that high speed, it would rip open the wing, rip open the fuel tank in the wing, and that wing would erupt into flames, a big fireball. The wings and probably the plane with them would have been destroyed before it could even get to the building, hitting 1 light pole. Now here we have an example of a case of an actual smaller plane. This is like a Learjet, but it hit the light pole here on the left. This is the light pole, and notice that after hitting the pole, the light pole wasn't severed like any of the ones at the Pentagon from its base. It was only damaged at the point of impact. And despite hitting that relatively small light pole compared to the plane, the result was it sheared off most of the wings, spilled jet fuel and wreckage over 100 feet. The thing crashed. There's the engine on the lower right, leaving the light pole only bent but still standing. And when this happened to a larger airliner of the size of Flight 77, 757, which was in Detroit in 1987, just as one example, 18 feet sheared off the wing when it hit 2 light poles going at a mere 222 miles an hour, far less than half the speed that the official story says Flight 77 was going when the leading edge of its wings, these flying fuel bombs, hit between 3 and 5 light poles. But 5 of them are downed. 5 light poles are downed in the so-called plane penetration path. So all of that is evidence that those light poles were also downed from the base, and in some cases also up a ways onto the light pole by pre-placed explosives as well. Now the government knows the real story of the 9/11 attacks is inside explosives, at the highest level of the government. Its official code name for the entire 9/11 investigation, as I mentioned, the FBI's code name is Pentagon Twin Towers bombing. The FBI actively lied to the Jersey girls who lost their husbands in the Twin Towers. Monica Gabriel has told me that she and some other of the Jersey girls were told by 2 of their FBI briefers when they asked, how come it's Pent bomb? if it's about planes hitting towers. They said, oh, well, all of our investigations end in bomb. Well, that's not true. The anthrax investigation is called Amerithrax, not Ameribomb. And the FBI's code names for its investigations that the public knows to be about bombs, like Oklahoma City bombing, do end in bomb, i.e. Oak bomb. Therefore, Pent bomb, the government knows that the real story of 9/11 at the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon is explosives, not plane impacts. The FBI's Strategic Intelligence Operations Center filled to capacity on 9/11. This is a quote from FBI Director Robert Mueller himself, Time magazine, May of 2011. It filled to capacity on 9/11 and remained that way through Pent bomb. This is still the director's quote. The FBI's cryptonym for Pentagon, Twin Towers, and bombing, from the mouth of the FBI director himself. Now I'm going to have to take a moment to get out of the main slide. Excuse me just for a moment. I'm going to go to another place in, let's see, no, I want to go back. Okay, 146. I'm going to pop forward in this presentation. Give me one moment, and we'll start up a little bit later, and then we'll go back, because I think it's a better order. Okay, 146. 146. All right. Okay. Can you see that? Yeah. A videographer soon on the scene at the Pentagon itself, Bob Pugh. Now, we are now, just a minute, there's something wrong here. Might have been the order I didn't intend. Let me see, just for a second. 146. Oh, I see. Got the wrong one. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay. I've hopefully shown, given you very compelling evidence that the real story in the so-called plane penetration path of Flight 77 is actually pre-placed inside and on the wall explosives, both in the outside columns in the so-called penetration point, on the inside in all three rings, and also to make the exit hole, the alleged exit hole on the inside of the third ring, and also almost certainly to bring down the 5 light poles in the so-called plane approach path. But pre-placed explosives inside the building that were obviously used to simulate a plane destruction path, they had to have a cover story. They had to have a large number of witnesses on the outside see an approach and destruction of a plane at or near the wall in order to hide the truth about what really happened inside the Pentagon and to protect themselves legally. They really didn't expect somebody like me to figure it out. Now, I'm going to show you, we're now going to move into what actually happened at the Pentagon, the first outside attack at the Pentagon. You've already heard that the first inside attack was at April Gallup's desk at almost exactly 9:30 that stopped her wristwatch at that time. Now you're going to see 2.5 minutes later what happened on the outside of the Pentagon. It is an attack by an entirely different plane, or let's call it an approach and destruction of an entirely different plane. Now you're about to see in the coming slides, there's going to be a debris field of a plane that approaches here on the so-called north path instead of the official story alleged approach path here. There's going to be a huge debris field and destruction with all kinds of plane parts and wreckage around here. Okay, now for comparison's sake, I'm now showing you this famous photograph that's been used by the 9/11 Truth Movement from early on to support the claim that there was no plane that was destroyed at the Pentagon at all. And this is not true, as you're going to see. However, the reason that they may have thought so is because this pristine lawn is outside, it's to the north, excuse me, the south or the right, outside of the wedge 1 by the so-called plane impact point here. So there's no, in that photograph, that famous photograph that's always used, there is no plane debris there. So you could reasonably be led to the conclusion there was no plane impact because there's no debris from a plane. However, this is the lawn off of wedge 2 and the heliport. after the plane destruction. And here's the edge of the heliport. There's lawn. All of this debris is over the lawn. The alleged plane penetration path is over here. It looks much closer to here than it is because of the angle the photograph is taken. It's actually about 150 feet between the alleged attack point and where all of this happens. But the wall has already fallen, which happened about 10:10. But look at all of the debris here, and then there are many other photographs. Witnesses said it was like millions of pieces after the fireball, millions of pieces of wreckage. It was like confetti. Here's another example. Looking back down to that pristine lawn area down there. You've got the Pentagon, there's that fire truck that was parked by the wall, and over here is the Pentagon firehouse with the Pentagon air traffic controllers lookout on the top. Now, as I mentioned, soon on the scene, this is where I accidentally moved forward. Soon on the scene was a professional videographer, but not a Pentagon videographer, Bob Pugh. You can see his video that he took on the lawn of this alleged impact point of Flight 77 and thereabouts on the, off the west side of the Pentagon, shortly after the attack. He said, quote, "There's a lot of debris in the foreground. Very small pieces, though. I mean, I'm standing on pieces of a dinner plate size or smaller. And all the while, I'm looking around for wreckage, and I can't find a piece of anything that I recognize of a plane. And I can't see the tail, I can't see wheels, I can't see engines. There are no chairs, no luggage." And you can see this for yourself in his video. So these are, it's not that there wasn't wreckage, it's just they weren't recognizable as very easily as parts of planes. Most of them, some of them were. But as you notice, the closer you get to the Pentagon west wall, the larger the pieces get. So he was out here. They kept all photographers at least 200 feet away. So when he says in the foreground, he meant to himself, that the further away from the wall you get, the smaller the pieces were. Now, of course, there were larger pieces. This is the famous piece of an alleged Boeing 757. What you're normally not told is that this piece landed, allegedly from an impact way over there, at least 120 feet, 100 to 120 feet to the left or the north around the helipad. As is another photograph looking south. The heliport firehouse is way over here to the left. That's actually yet another fire truck, not the one that you saw by the heliport firehouse. And if you can see all these firefighters, to the right of them begins the pristine lawn way down there by the alleged impact point where the wall has fallen over it a little bit before. We also know the time of the real violent event that caused this fire and debris field near the heliport. And I'm now going to prove that to you. It's 9:32 and 30 seconds. This is the clock from the heliport tower itself that was stopped by the violent event just outside of the heliport firehouse tower. It is stopped at 9:32 and 30 seconds. And I mentioned before that this is a clock from the Naval Command Center. 2 and 3 rings in. This is outside of wedge 2. This is inside of wedge 1, 2 or 3 rings in the Naval Command Center. Note that it stopped at almost the same time, in this case, 9:31 and 40 seconds. And believe it or not, the original Smithsonian Institution 9/11 exhibit, there's the clock. They actually, that clock from the heliport tower, this clock was actually given to the Smithsonian Institution. And last September, after the DC 9/11 conference, I went over, and even though they've taken down this exhibit and put up a different one, they kind of cycle them out. They do still have the clock. I ascertained that, and I'm trying to get more information about it. This is Ted Olson's famous telephone, in which we now know the FBI has sworn under oath at the Moussaoui trial he never did talk to his wife Barbara on it, so it's a lie. And over here is a beautiful example of the steel reinforcement, the spiral steel reinforcement on the inside of some of those Pentagon columns where the concrete was completely melted away, which takes about 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't think the Smithsonian Institution knows what they have. So, one of the big elephants in the room, and I like to say that there's actually a herd of elephants in the room, and that's just the lead elephant in the herd. But the lead elephant in the herd that proves that one of the elephants in the herd that proves the official story of what happened at the Pentagon has to be false, of course, is time, because we've seen those clocks. Now, the government is not only lying about the time of the first Pentagon attack, which you're going to see more of, a white plane coming in at 9:32, bursting into a huge fireball, almost killing the Pentagon heliport firefighters who were standing very close to it and jumped out of the way at the last minute to save their lives, and then immediately started fighting the fires from that white plane explosion. In addition to that, the government is also actively hiding the time in the famous 5 frames videotapes that they have released to the public that allegedly proved that a plane hit the building, that they released in, I believe it was 2000. There were 5 frames that were leaked in 2002, in spring of 2002, and then the videotapes from which those 5 frames were taken were released in 2006, I believe it was, in the Moussaoui trial. Now again, you've already seen this, that the Pentagon releases, or excuse me, the Pentagon releases this. As I mentioned, the Army asked the seismic experts to check the seismic signals for when the attack on the building happened and when the wall collapsed, because they wanted to know the times. And notice this spike, which represents, this is alleged from the collision of Flight 77. Notice, if they wanted to support the official story, why would they black out the time? Well, for obvious reasons. And then also, this is the most important frame of the famous 5 frames from the 5 frames videotapes that were released by the FBI in the Moussaoui trial. And notice this over on the right. Do you think that the original frame said number 4, impact of a plane? No. And notice that it's September 12th, not September 11th, and it's at 5:37 p.m. Well, obviously, these have been added, they've been photoshopped in to this frame that was released by the FBI and the Pentagon in the Moussaoui trial. Now, the original of this frame, I am assured by experts on CTV videos, these video frames were taken at 1 frame per second, that every single frame, because it's a security camera, would have the time and date stamp of the actual time, the actual date and real time of that fireball. And by putting this in, they have covered up the, we assume this is September 11th, but they have, the purpose of that is to, I believe, is to cover up the actual time of the fireball, which I believe is the explosion and destruction of the white plane you're about to see the evidence for. Also, that very 5 frames video, the one that you just saw, and that's a frame taken from it, one of the famous 5 frames taken from those videos. There were 2, actually, 2 videos. That very 5 frames video is the only one of all 85 videos that the FBI has stated publicly it has in its possession from 9/11 at all that shows any evidence of an alleged Pentagon impact, the only one. And we know that from a sworn statement by the FBI's FOI, Freedom of Information Act officer, McGuire. You can read this online. You can see her whole sworn report online. And this is the critical paragraph of her report. Out of the remaining, she analyzed all 85 videos. Out of the remaining 13 videotapes, which did show the Pentagon crash site at all, 12, all but one of those, showed the Pentagon only after the impact, she's assuming, of Flight 77. She said, by looking at all of them, I determined, Agent McGuire, I determined that only a single videotape showed the evidence of the impact of Flight 77 on the Pentagon, and that's it. And as you know, there are tremendous problems with this. It doesn't show a plane. There were actually 2. At the time that she did this, she must not have known that the FBI or the Pentagon had actually 2 security cameras at almost just a few feet from each other. This is a frame from one of them, and there's actually a second. But there's this post here blocks what would have been a plane. And so all this famous fireball is proof of, is of course an explosion. So why is the Pentagon hiding the time? Because the first violent event at the Pentagon obviously happened, as I'm going to prove to you, more than 5 minutes before the official story says Flight 77 was anywhere close to the building. And the real time, of course, if it was revealed, would completely destroy the official story and reveal what actually happened there. The time of the first attack at the Pentagon, and there were more than one, wasn't even the white plane explosion, and we'll get to that. of 9:32 and 30 seconds, but it was just after 9:32, as we've already gone into with April Gallup's wristwatch. Very quickly through this slide, it's very interesting that mainstream media reports, the first ones, 9/11, right, 9/12, 9/12, were telling the truth, that the Pentagon attack happened about 9:30, which is when April Gallup's in the internal explosion by her desk that stopped her wristwatch at 9:30. And as time went by, you go down here, there's 9:12, 9:14. The times they're all over the map. But many of the mainstream media and press, the early times were actually accurate. And then they changed to the official story, alleged Flight 77 impact time of almost 9:38. There are official records and testimony of the actual early first attack time at the Pentagon. Believe it or not, the White House's own internal timeline that they never thought would be made public, that they gave to the 9/11 Commission, that they made on 9/11 inside the White House. This is a copy of it. That the American Airlines, they were assuming it was American Airlines 77, impacted the Pentagon, that says 9:30. White House counsel and later Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, in an official tape lecture at the Naval Postgraduate School, and I have the tape, he says the Pentagon was attacked at 9:32. That is a rounding down of, as you will see, the time of the white plane destruction near the heliport at 9:32 and a half. The FAA's official timeline, that's been on the record for years, says 9:32, Pentagon attack. There are many, many more. If the Pentagon was really attacked at or shortly after 9:30, and not at almost 9:38 as the official lie claims, you would expect, if you look for it, that major official reactions in Washington would only have happened immediately after the real attack, shortly after 9:30. And in fact, that's true, once you look for it. The E-4B that we saw at the beginning, the Flying Pentagon, was flying over Washington, D.C. a little bit before 9:30, and it was actually flying over Washington, D.C. at the true first outside Pentagon attack time of 9:32 and a half. At 9:52 on CNN's live broadcast on 9/11 itself, Jonathan King reported that the White House evacuation had begun, quote, about 30 minutes ago, i.e. about 9:32, and there are many others. This is actually from ABC's 2020 with then Secretary of Defense Gates on board the E-4B with Diane Sawyer, confirming that this Flying Pentagon was over Washington, D.C. on 9/11 when the Pentagon was attacked. The Pentagon attack triggered the White House and all the other federal building evacuations, Supreme Court, State Department, etc. And they also happened just after 9:30. At about 9:30 a.m., according to Newsweek, the Secret Service told staffers leaving, evacuating the White House to run and not walk. The crash at the Pentagon triggered steps in the, security steps in the Washington area, including after the real Pentagon attack, right after 9:30, the West Wing of the White House. At 9:32, the Pentagon attack, unbelievably, finally triggered the Secret Service in the Florida classroom to finally remove Bush from the Florida school. After allowing the president to simply sit like a deer in the headlights for it's actually 10 to 12 minutes after being told that the second World Trade Center tower had been hit and America is under attack by Andrew Card whispering in his ear. Only after the actual first Pentagon attack, the timing I can prove for you, did the Secret Service finally believe the country was really under a terrorist attack, which leads me to infer very strongly that they expected the two Twin Tower attacks. They did not, those Secret Service officers in Florida did not expect the Pentagon attack, which happened at 9:32. It was not until just after the Pentagon was actually attacked at 9:32 and a half that the Secret Service came in and pulled Bush out of his press briefing, which he very quickly stopped. The press briefing went from 9:30 to 9:32, and by 9:33 he was in the limousine leaving at 9:34, while Flight 77 was still miles and miles from Washington, D.C. In clear response to the real first Pentagon attack, at 9:32 and a half, the white plane coming in, as you'll see the evidence here in a moment. Thank you very much. Civilian airline pilots at 9:32 received a high security alert in their cockpits. Now this is from United Airlines, but we can assume that that was also true of other air carriers. At 9:33, at 9:30 to 9:35, Andrews Air Force Base went on alert. And 9:33 falls within that window, and then another source, a better source. At 9:33, this is an official source, an offer of fighter jet F-15 interceptors to the Secret Service and the White House PEOC by Major Crane of Andrews Air Force Base that had already been made after the second tower had been hit at 9:03, that had been rejected, was finally accepted after the real first attack at the Pentagon. It was accepted at 9:33, which to me is immediately after the 9:32 and 32nd real first Pentagon attack of the white plane you're going to hear about in a moment. At 9:33, Langley Air Force Base interceptor pilots, 3 of them, including pilot Dean Ekman, a 3rd pilot, they received a shoot-down order for any non-responsive planes coming within 30 miles of Washington, D.C. Therefore, that famous interaction between Cheney and Mineta in the PEOC, the bunker under the White House in which Cheney's order has been misinterpreted to be a stand-down order, it was a shoot-down order. It had to be, because we know we have an official record that a shoot-down order was given at 9:33, and both Mineta and Cheney are leading you to believe that they were talking about the official story plane Flight 77 didn't even get to the building for another 5 minutes. Even in New York City, where 2 attacks on 2 World Trade Center towers had not yet caused the New York Stock Exchange to be shut down, when was it finally shut down? Ordered shut down 9:32, which is, I believe, a rounding down of right after the true first Pentagon, external Pentagon attack. So here we get into the meat of what really happened at the Pentagon. So the question is, so what happened at the Pentagon at 9:32½? What violent event at or near the heliport that caused all of that debris that you saw stopped the heliport firehouse clock at 9:32½, when the official story says Flight 77 was still about 50 miles from Washington and wouldn't even approach the building for another 5 minutes and 16 seconds? This is what witnesses saw. Multiple witnesses saw a large, white, very white, low-flying plane with 2 stripes down the side, blue and red, or some say blue and red, others say blue and orange-red, approach the Pentagon, and depending upon the witness, hit, drag, or scraped its wing at or near the heliport. You're not able to go up again and go over the roof after you've hit your wing, especially it's a flying fuel bomb, just before bursting indeed into a fireball. That, I believe, is the fireball you see in that famous 5 frames photo, frame number 4. And as American Airlines planes are all polished silverly aluminum, it could not have been Flight 77 or any American Airlines airliner. Witness Jim Sutherland, quote, "It was a white twin-engine plane with multicolored horizontal stripes, flying an estimated 50 feet above the ground in a straight-line approach." There are many North Path witnesses that describe the plane as white, and extremely low flying, coming in just above treetop level. And you can, without going into all of them, white with a stripe, off-white, white, you can see the actual videotaped interviews of these so-called North Side witnesses in Citizens Investigation Team's online videotape compilation called Flight 77, The White Plane. A caller to CNET Radio on 9/11 as the attacks were happening just after the Pentagon attack, quote, witness, "The right-hand side where the helipad is right where a light white jet was circling around." William Middleton at the Arlington County Cemetery, was an Arlington County Cemetery worker, also saw a white plane circling back around. It came, it went towards Reagan Airport, didn't get anywhere close to down by the Pentagon, went to Reagan Airport as if it was going to land, didn't, circled back around, came in low, came in on a north path to the north of the Naval Annex, came into the heliport and exploded. "The plane I seen was white," he said. "When it came past me, so close he could feel the heat, it was white." You can see him on videotape on the CIT website in that Flight 77, The White Plane. Both Middleton and the heliport air traffic controller himself, sitting in that little place on top of the heliport firehouse, looking immediately just a few feet down at the place where the fireball went. His name is Sean Boger. Both of them pinpointed exactly where the white plane hit. I'm now going to show you. What Boger and Middleton said is that in the past, prior to 9/11, this is an aerial photograph of the Pentagon sometime before 9/11, that the heliport air traffic controllers where Boger was is right here on top of the heliport firehouse. This is the old the heliport air traffic controller. And they moved it from there over to on top of the firehouse. And both of them said that that is where the plane burst into a fireball. This is the alleged impact point, and that's the helipad. And then, unbelievably, at that heliport and around it, only about 100 feet from where he was just outside the heliport firehouse, heliport firefighter, the Pentagon's own firefighter, Alan Wallace, saw a white plane with 2 horizontal stripes. He described them as blue and orange, but they were almost certainly blue and dark orange or red to simulate an American Airlines airliner, was coming very rapidly towards him at a diagonal angle, and both he and his fellow firefighter, Mark Skipper, that should have been Skipper, not Slipper, that they saw it coming at them. He estimated 25 feet above the ground. He has published this, and they had to, at the very last minute, run out of the way to avoid being killed, and they got out of the way just in time not to be killed by the huge fireball, but they were burned by it. They immediately came back and started fighting the fire from that plane destruction of a white plane right by the heliport. Now, Wallace said the stripes were orange and blue, probably red and blue. This is simply, I'm not saying that this is what it looked like. This is just an example of any plane that can be mocked up. This happens to be a Global Hawk that can be mocked up to appear to be an American airliner, which these special operations guys are doing. To avoid being hit by the white plane that came in on a north path and was destroyed near the heliport at 9:32 and 30 seconds and stopped the heliport tower clock at 9:32 and 30 seconds, heliport firefighter Alan Wallace ran toward the outer wall of the heliport firehouse and leapt for cover under a van. You're going to see that van in a moment. After coming out shortly after the fireball, he started fighting the fire, and he looked around and he said, he's published this, quote, "Everything is on fire. The grass is on fire. The building's on fire. The firehouse is on fire. Fire everywhere. Areas of blacktop," meaning the helipad, were on fire. Debris everywhere. The trees were on fire. And this is what he saw. This is the lawn right off the heliport firehouse. There's the heliport air traffic controller. This is the fire truck that he had just pulled out of this open door of the heliport firehouse and parked to the back of the building. And he and Mark Skipper had just walked on the far side, between the far side of the fire truck and this side of the heliport firehouse. Out this way, they just come here just beyond when they saw the white plane coming in and leapt over here and saved their lives. It's very important. Most people don't know this. I think it's extremely important. If the attacks hadn't happened on 9/11, the published schedule for George Bush after he left the Florida school was to come to this heliport between 12 noon and 12:30. I don't think that's a coincidence, because when Dick Cheney talked to, we know that Dick Cheney and Bush talked, that Bush talked to Dick Cheney in the PIOC between when he left the Florida classroom at about 9:18 and when he started the 2-minute press briefing at 9:30 in the Florida school, that Bush gave Cheney an authorization for a shoot down, which we know from the staff reports from the 9/11 Commission that Cheney did pass on to the National Military Command Center, and which order was accepted by the Secret Service only at 9:33, right after that attack. Multiple witnesses also saw the left wing of the plane, with the white plane, touched the ground by the helipad. The left wing dipped and scraped the helicopter area. These are all separate witnesses. The left wing touched the helipad. The plane dragged its left wing. Oops, I'm now on low battery power. Could somebody please give me that briefcase, and we're going to plug in. I need to have a plug to plug in my charger. Thanks. And then somebody can help me find a plug, if there is one. Plug this in. Hey, right there. Okay. We're back in business. Okay. Multiple witnesses also saw. Okay, further quotes. It looked like it hit the helicopter pad, then skipped up before bursting into a fireball. The plane caught the edge of its wing on the ground. There's a helicopter pad right in front of the side of the Pentagon. The wing first touched there. This is the helicopter, the helipad here with all this debris after the plane came in and exploded into a fireball. The heliport firefighters immediately began to fight the fires from this 9:32:30 destruction of the white plane by the heliport. And they therefore were there fighting the fires from that first early plane destruction before the official story says Flight 77 even got anywhere close to the building. And not a single witness experienced or reported that there were 2 plane destructions at the Pentagon, impact or otherwise. Only this white plane. There's even a witness, Penny Eglis. This is a piece of the plane that she says fell off into the sky and fell through the sunroof of her car. And I believe she's given this to the Smithsonian Institution. Again, the Smithsonian Institution, all of the physical evidence there needs to be used in a new investigation of 9/11 and subpoenaed. The inside surface, notice it's dark red graphite. It looks nothing like the dark green on the inner surface of the body of American airliners for fireproofing. Many Northside witnesses of this plane said that it was white. But as the white plane exploded into a fireball, if it's the same plane that some witnesses say approached north of the Citgo gas station in the Navy Annex, it could not have overflown the building, which is the claim of a 9/11 group called Citizens Investigation Team. It's simply not possible. The white plane, in fact, and that is the plane that their Northside witnesses saw, it was destroyed at 9:32 and 30 seconds. Now, at the DC conference this last September, I actually found and interviewed a perfect vantage point Pentagon witness. She was working on the top floor of the Pentagon Sheraton Hotel in the ballroom on the 17th floor that very morning with 2 other staff members. And she was by this huge plate glass window and experienced the entire plane filling up the window. The plane came this direction from the south going towards the north on a diagonal angle, just as the Pentagon heliport firefighters and other witnesses state. And she experienced, all 3 of them experienced the building shaking. Hugely, they were afraid it was an earthquake and they were actually going to be killed with a building falling. It was that heavy a shaking. And immediately after the shaking, as it dissipated slightly, the entire plate glass window, which is huge, the plate glass window is about the size of that in the back of that wall in the back of this room, of this auditorium, it filled with the plane, going at a diagonal angle like this, and then she saw it go to the left side of the Naval Annex, which is consistent with all of the Citizens Investigation Team witnesses and the witnesses at the heliport itself, and then she saw an immense fireball. And it was a perfect vantage point witness, as if in a huge television screen. And I'm going to get her on record. And there wasn't, this is amazing, there wasn't just a white plane that came in and was destroyed at or near the heliport. There was also a military helicopter that was buzzing around. It did not land, but it was buzzing beneath 100 feet between I-395 and the helipad, buzzing around for almost 5 minutes, for 4 minutes and 42 seconds, just before the white plane flew in and was destroyed and burst into a fireball. How do we know that? From this record from Reagan National Airport of a MC, stands for Marine Corps military helicopter, was at the Pentagon heliport area, not the heliport itself, showing its arrival, which from the vantage point of the Reagan National Airport radar, they can only see down to a radar floor of 100 feet. So when they say it arrived, what they mean is that it came in, they saw it, and then it disappeared around the heliport area and went below the 100 feet. And you could see right here, 9:32 and 30 seconds, it reappears and rises above the threshold, the radar floor, only 3 seconds after the destruction of the white plane, right there. So even though it is an inference, this incredible timing leads me to conclude the likely high probability that that helicopter, which was, as you'll see, a Huey attack helicopter that has missiles, destroyed that white plane. Here's the radar record. This is from the 9/11 Commission report, right up here, MC Hilo, Marine Corps Hilo. Jeffrey Mark Parsons is a very important witness to this helicopter. He also watched an erratically flying helicopter before the fireball explosion by the helipad. From the 17th floor of his hotel, which was across I-395, which is to the south, a little bit to the south, not far. Parsons saw a helicopter, which he said was a Huey, and he knew because he used to fly Hueys, he recognized it. That was flying erratically. He said it was like a bumblebee pattern between the hotel over I-395 and the helipad, and then it disappeared from his perspective below the Pentagon roof. He assumed it had landed. We don't have any evidence it actually landed at the helipad. It was like flying around waiting for something close to the helipad. Just a few minutes later, after he left his window, he then heard a huge explosion, raced back to the window, looked out, saw this big smoke cloud over by the helipad, and assumed that the helicopter had actually exploded. But of course, that wasn't the case. Parsons said it was a Huey helicopter, and also heliport controller himself on the top of the heliport firehouse, air traffic controller station, Sean Boger, in his videotape testimony on the Citizens Investigation Team, he refers to an H-53. I've looked that up. It's a Huey 53 helicopter. These are military assault and evacuation aircraft. Air Force witness to CNN's Chris Plant, live, put out on broadcast on 9/11, quote, Chris Plant on television. I was told by one witness, an Air Force senior enlisted man, that he was outside the Pentagon when the attack occurred. He said he saw a helicopter circling the building, meaning flying in this weird pattern. He said it appeared to be a U.S. military, i.e. that MC Marine Corps helicopter, and that from his vantage point, it disappeared behind the building. He was on the other side of it, where the helicopter landing zone is. This is all put out on TV. And then he saw a fireball go into the sky. The helicopter first disappeared behind the building, and after a short time, there was an explosion and a fireball. This is all consistent testimony, totally. The near simultaneity of the helicopter takeoff and the white plane explosion at 9:32 and 30 seconds, only 3 seconds apart, and you can imagine that the clock was off by 3 seconds. These are essentially simultaneous events. The destruction of the white plane just before it could have hit the wall, and the helicopter doing whatever it came to do and taking off. Naval historian John Sherwood told Pentagon witness Jeffrey Mark Parsons, it's on record, you can read about this in David Ray Griffin's recent books, that a helicopter was sent to the Pentagon, believe it or not, by the White House. This almost certainly means Vice President Cheney and or the Secret Service and the PIOC for the purpose of preventing the plane from going into the Pentagon. Now, if they're talking about the white plane, and I believe that they are, then that Huey helicopter definitely did indeed prevent the white plane from actually finally hitting the wall. The near simultaneity of the takeoff of the helicopter and the explosion and fireball at the helipad also explains why witnesses whose vantage points only allowed them to see a helicopter and not also the white plane led to erroneous early reports to the media that the Pentagon had actually been attacked by a helicopter. The very first reports put out by Reuters wire service actually quoted Vice President Cheney himself as having said that the first reports he had received from the Pentagon suggested that the attack on the Pentagon was by a helicopter. Of course, Cheney would know if he ordered the helicopter. Now, all of this happened at 9:32 and 30 seconds, or thereabout, over 5 minutes before the official story says Flight 77 or anything else coming in that so-called return east trajectory was anywhere close to the Pentagon. Now, give me a moment. I'm going to go back to slide 14. I'm slightly changing the order for my presentation in Boulder last night because I think it's a little bit clearer. So slide 114. Slide 114 is here. All right. Now you're going to see the overwhelming proof that the official story that Flight 77 hit the west wall in Wedge 1 at almost 9:38 is a lie. There's a single engine, smaller than a 757 engine that was found. You'd have to measure it, but yes, there was a single engine found. And what's interesting is that drones often... It was not a Boeing, basically. No, of course it wasn't a Boeing. No, the white plane wasn't a Boeing. It couldn't have been, it was white. It's going forward. But I have been told by those who know, by experts, that many drones have single engines. Only a single engine was found that has been made public.
Did anyone found the helicopter pilots that shot down the white plane?
No, that's probably, I don't know if he's even alive. I don't know why this isn't moving
So
forward.
I think you're not in the PowerPoint show.
Oh, you're right. Thank you very much. I'm not in the PowerPoint. I will do it every time. That'll do it every time. Thank you. Okay. So here we're going to have thank you, boy. Overwhelming proof the official story cannot be true. All right. So you've seen these clocks before. Maybe, I think we have. This is, the heliport tower clock. And, of course, this is the Naval Command Center clock. Both stopped at approximately the same time, way before almost 9:38, the official story alleged impact point of Flight 77. And as we'll see, the only plane seen to be destroyed at the Pentagon came in far earlier. Well, because I've reversed the orders, you already know that. Flight data recorders. All flight data recorders, I'm told by FDR expert Dennis Semino, record, amongst many other things, the data for exterior pressure signals, exterior pressure on the body of the plane. Even from a single bird hitting a wing, for instance, this is an example of that. However, the flight data recorder that the FBI claims and the Pentagon claims was found inside the alleged C-ring exit hole did not record any kind of an impact on light poles of any kind, let alone a bird. Now, even if a 757 had made it past those 5 light holes without the flying wing tanks exploding, these 6-foot-high cable spools that were directly in front of the alleged impact point, which is right here, and it was supposed to be a diagonal trajectory, they would have been overturned, and they weren't. They're still upright. Real outside terrorists, if they had been on a plane that they were really trying to have a terrorist attack on the Pentagon, surely would have targeted the easiest to hit roof. Just go straight into the roof, or the central courtyard, or surely the offices of the high-ranking officials like Rumsfeld on the opposite side of the building. They would never, ever, ever have chosen exactly where the official story says the impact was. They would have never chosen the least populated because it had just been hardened with all of the construction crews there on the inside as well. The least populated, newly hardened west wedge, hardened to prevent the penetration of a plane at exactly that part of the building. Also the hardest to physically hit due to many physical obstacles, a hill, the Virginia Department of Transportation antenna, those 5 light poles, chain link fence, and those 6-foot-high cable spools that aren't turned over anyway. They also couldn't have done it, according to many, many pilots who have flown, including those who have flown the exact physical plane that the government says flew as Flight 77 on 9/11. They say that these pilots say it is aerodynamically impossible, and in fact beyond the skill of even the most experienced military pilots. When the official lie of 9/11 claims that there was a hijacker pilot, Honegger, allegedly on Flight 77, who couldn't even pass the flight test on a small Cessna plane. Certified Top Gun Navy pilot Ralph Kolstad, whom I personally interviewed, told me this, quote, "I could not have flown it," meaning a Boeing 757, and he flew that precise plane. "I could not have flown it the way the official story flight path was described, and at the speed of almost over 550 miles per hour, according to the official story. I," meaning Kolstad, "was a Navy fighter pilot and an air combat instructor and have experience flying low-altitude, high-speed aircraft. I could not have done what these beginners, Honegger and company, allegedly did. Something about the official story stinks to high heaven." This is a man who flew that very alleged plane. So where did the explosive used in the Pentagon attack come from, and who most likely planted them? Technically, this slide should have been earlier. Donald Rumsfeld's personal longtime business associate named Peter Jansen happened to be CEO of AMAC Corporation, which did the Pentagon upgrade. And it was that corporation that brought in the controlled demolition explosives, because they had to use controlled demolition explosives to do selective demolition in the early stages of the upgrade of the wedges. And the subcontractor of AMAC was ACE, or ACE, and I've interviewed a subcontractor for ACE who has gone on the record stating that there were deliveries of controlled demolition explosives to the Pentagon in the entire week before 9/11, and a truck had more of them coming in but couldn't get to the building because of the attacks on 9/11 that very morning. That's Rumsfeld's personal business partner in the past. Now let's see what the government says happened to the official story plane. Now I'm going to call that the 937 plane, which it falsely claims, as you're going to see, was Flight 77. In other words, the government claims Flight 77 is the plane that left from Dulles Airport at 8:20, went out, turned around, and came back, and took about an hour and 17 minutes to come back and slam into the Pentagon at about 9:38. That's the official story. As we will see, this the Flight 77 flight data recorder, and by that I mean, I put Flight 77 in quotes, by that flight data recorder I mean the one that the Pentagon and the FBI claims they found in the rubble just inside the alleged C-ring exit hole. It cannot be from Flight 77 or from any American Airlines airliner, and I'm going to prove that to you in a moment. But even if it were from Flight 77 or any American Airlines airliner, the flight data recorder data from that alleged data recorder and the cockpit animation simulation based upon it don't even agree on what happened in the final seconds. And now you're going to see, this is the final frame. You can see the entire simulation on Pilots for 9/11 Truth's website and their videos, but you're looking at the final frame of the simulation based upon the data given to Pilots for 9/11 Truth in an FOIA request from the National Transportation Safety Board itself, NTSB. And Pilots for 9/11 Truth has done an analysis of this simulation, and over at the right you will see the cockpit data dials, readouts, and they have been able to show that even the falsely alleged flight data recorder from Flight 77, allegedly found inside the C-ring alleged exit hole, showed the plane on a north path and not the official story south path, and secondly showed that the plane coming in over the Pentagon way too high to even hit the roof, let alone the first floor, which is the official story. Also, the ground effect makes a 757 impact at the speeds that the official story claims, over 550 miles an hour, into the first floor. And we say first floor because the Pentagon's own building performance report states clearly that 90 to 95% of the damage inside the building was on the ground floor, or the first floor. Coming in level is aerodynamically impossible. That you can only get closer to the ground, according to the ground effect, than approximately one wing width, and a 757's wing is 56 feet. So I've added on this, I've added a plane coming in at about 56 feet, which takes it in, the roof of the Pentagon is 71 feet approximately, and that's taking it in about between the fourth to the fifth floor, not the ground floor. Graphic representation of the cause of the ground effect of this high pressure vortices under the wings, that it's like a cushion in the atmosphere is so thick close to the ground. It's also physically impossible for a 757 to fly just above the ground. I mentioned that to you already. So the government wants you to believe that the laws of physics were canceled the closer you got to the Pentagon on 9/11. Now you're going to see this, what you're about to see, is what the Pentagon happened in the final split second as it reached the wall. This is literally what they want you to believe. This is another example of what they want you to believe. This is a properly proportioned 757, which is, as I recall, body length 156 feet. Now that's more than twice the height of the 71-foot high Pentagon. And this is where you're supposed to believe that it came in without gouging the lawn, because remember the lawn was nice and pristine right there, with those huge steel and titanium 6-ton engines, half of which, they're over almost 12.5 feet in diameter themselves, and half of that is below the wings. This is one of the between 8 and 9 foot diameter steel and titanium 6-ton engines. Based on the interior damage, which we know from the Pentagon Building Performance Report was almost completely in the ground floor, the top of the fuselage, the top of the fuselage, according to that report itself, which was commissioned by the Pentagon, was could be no more than 20 feet above the ground. But when you do the math, given that the fuselage is 12 feet 4 inches in diameter, and the diameter of those huge steel and titanium 6-ton engines, half of which are down below the wings, it makes it absolutely impossible. The official story is impossible for a 757 to have made 90 to 95% of its damage in the first floor. Physically impossible. There it is again, and notice those engines close to the ground. If that had happened, it would have looked something like this or worse. And there was nothing like that on the pristine lawn. There's the pristine lawn. That's what it should have looked like. That's what it looked like. Also, even if a plane had gotten through those 5 light poles and those 6-foot-high spools that were still standing right in front of the official story alleged impact point, plane shouldn't have been able to penetrate that newly hardened outer wall, which was specifically designed after the Oklahoma City bombing to withstand outside the building bombs at the wall, or high-force lateral impacts as of a plane. This, for instance, is what happens to the nose, and they want us to believe that the nose, not only the nose, but all of the plane went through that hardened wall of 2 feet thick. And by the way, it had Kevlar. It had 2 foot thick with steel and Kevlar mesh reinforced on the inside. It was like a huge bomb and plane-proof vest, this outer wall, that we're supposed to believe that this plane got through. And this is what happens to a comparably sized airliner when it hit a completely unhardened soundproof wall, just a wall to keep sound from getting through, going at only about 88 miles an hour. This is what happens to the nose of a plane colliding with a single flying Canadian goose. And when I saw this, this particular pair of images in an analysis, I thought, we are going to cook their goose. Now, this is further proof that a plane, no plane could have gotten through that hardened wall. This is from a director of research engineering, Dwayne Dietz, from his presentation at the DC 9/11 conference just this past September. Both of us were presenters on the Pentagon. And this is a simulation from his PowerPoint. It's a simulation of a smaller plane, an F-15, hitting a hardened wall, hardened similarly to the West Wedge, Wedge 1 of the Pentagon that we are supposed to believe Flight 77 got through. And what this shows is that almost all of the plane is destroyed and turned, another slide right after this in his presentation, turned into confetti. And only little tiny pieces, if that, got through. This would be inside the building. So summarizing to this point, the Pentagon's official story claims that after striking 5 light poles with the leading edge of its flying fuel bomb wings, that after striking 5 light poles without those flying fuel bomb wings exploding and making it through the impossible to get through newly hardened Wedge 1 wall, specifically hardened to withstand just such a terrorist attack, still without its wing tanks exploding, a Boeing 757, it claims, did then finally explode, but only after the wings were inside the building. This is the outer wall, and this is the Purdue University simulation, leading us to believe that those wing tanks only explode after somehow the whole plane, almost all of it, got inside the building through the hardened wall. And this is also from the Purdue University simulation that the government likes to use. This is also from the Pentagon Building Performance Report, contracted by the Pentagon. The official story claims that once inside, after the plane was progressively shredded as it moved towards the alleged exit hole in the inside of the C-ring, dispersing its parts over between 285 and 310 feet at a diagonal angle through 3 walls, that it turned into a quasi-liquid fuel and debris slurry. This is from the Pentagon Building Performance Report. And then somehow that slurry magically reconstituted itself into a perfectly focused cone of energy to create this perfectly round exit hole on the inside of the 3rd ring in, which we already know didn't have any plane parts whatsoever in this debris pile from the man who went to take the photographs for the Pentagon itself. And this is from Dwayne Dietz also, former NASA Director of Research Engineering, Dwayne Dietz. Despite, and the government claims this, despite, and this was his analysis, it's quite obvious once you look at it. This is the alleged exit hole. Where's my little pair? Down here at the bottom, and that's the alleged entrance hole. These squares are the still standing columns. These steel reinforced, spiral steel reinforced columns. He has determined that there is no direct path from the alleged entrance point or anywhere close to it that gets to the alleged exit point without multiple still standing columns in the way.
He was told to become a slurry, so it kind of went around.
Yeah, but if it goes around, it doesn't reconstitute itself in a perfect cone of energy. So the bottom line here, folks, is that the official story of what happened at the Pentagon is not only false, it is completely absurd. There is not a single part of the official story of the Pentagon that is true. Now allow me to go, the last part of this presentation starts at 2:08.